A lot of players blame RNG for their losses, but in reality, they are creating situations where RNG matters too much. Top players don't just get luckier, they build turns that reduce risk and maximize consistency. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to stop losing to RNG in Pokémon Champions by fixing the way you structure your turns. Before we talk about how to reduce RNG in Pokémon Champions, we need to understand what RNG actually is. RNG, or random number generation, is basically any mechanic in Pokemon that has a chance-based outcome attached to it. This includes things like missing attacks, critical hits, flinches from moves like Rock Slide, status chances from moves like Scald or Dire Claw, and even damage rolls. A lot of people don't realize this, but even when a move lands successfully, there's still randomness involved in how much damage it actually does. And because Pokemon has all these mechanics built into it, RNG is never fully avoidable. No matter how well you play, there will always be games where something unexpected happens. But competitive Pokemon has never really been about eliminating RNG entirely. It's about managing probability and putting yourself in positions where randomness has less impact on the outcome of the game. That's one of the biggest differences between average players and high-level players. Good players don't win because they somehow avoid bad luck altogether. They win because they consistently create turns where RNG is less likely to hurt them and more likely to favor them over time. If you want to learn how to play more consistently, build stronger teams, and improve your decision making in Pokemon Champions, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be covering a lot more competitive strategy and high-level concepts like this moving forward. One of the biggest mistakes players make is thinking that RNG is something that only happens to them randomly, when in reality, a lot of bad RNG situations are actually created by the decisions the player made beforehand. For example, if you constantly rely on low accuracy moves when there were safer options available, you're increasing the amount of randomness in your games. Sometimes the stronger player is not the move with the highest damage output, but the move that is the most reliable and keeps control of the game in your hands. Another common issue is constantly taking 50-50s. A lot of players put themselves into situations where they are forced to guess between two options over and over again, instead of positioning themselves in a way that limits the opponent's choices. The more guesses you force yourself to make, the more volatile your games become. This also applies to strategies that rely too heavily on things like Rock Slide flinches, critical hits, or hoping your opponent misses. While those mechanics can absolutely help you win games sometimes, if your entire game plan depends on them happening consistently, you're basically gambling instead of building stable win conditions. Overextending for damage is another huge one. Sometimes players tunnel vision on maximizing damage every turn instead of thinking about positioning, defensive value, or long-term board control. This can lead to situations where one miss, one critical hit, or one bad roll suddenly loses the game because the player gave themselves no room for error. And this is where a really important mindset shift happens. A lot of players will say, "I got unlucky," but sometimes what actually happened is they chose the inconsistent line. High-level players are constantly thinking about how to make the game easier on themselves by reducing unnecessary risk and creating turns where even if RNG happens, the game is still manageable. So, if a bad positioning and inconsistent decision making create more RNG, the next question becomes, how do you actually fix that? The answer is by building turns that are more stable, more controlled, and harder for randomness to punish. The first thing strong players understand is that positioning is often more important than raw damage. A lot of players focus entirely on attacking every turn because they feel pressured to constantly make aggressive progress. But sometimes the strongest move on the field is actually switching. Creating safer board states gives you more control over the game long term. For example, repositioning into a better matchup, preserving an important Pokemon, or setting up speed control can often be much stronger than forcing damage immediately. This is also where tempo comes into play. If you control the pace of the game, you force your opponent into uncomfortable situations where they have to react to you instead of the other way around. And when you consistently maintain strong positioning, RNG matters less because your board state is stable even if something goes wrong. A lower risk turn is often much stronger long term than a high risk turn that could instantly lose the game if one thing goes wrong. Another major improvement players can make is valuing consistency over maximum reward. Sometimes players get too focused on the highest possible payoff instead of the most reliable line. For example, choosing accurate moves instead of gambling on low accuracy attacks can massively reduce unnecessary losses over time. The same applies to prioritizing guaranteed pressure instead of constantly forcing hard reads. A lot of newer players think high-level play is about making crazy predictions every turn, but most top players actually do the opposite. They often choose the line that gives them the highest percentage chance to win over time, rather than the flashy 50-50 plays that looks impressive if it works. In other words, strong players are usually taking the 80% winning line instead of gambling the entire game on a single prediction. Another thing players often overlook is that you're not just trying to make your own game plan more consistent, you're also trying to reduce your opponent's ability to abuse RNG against you. For example, if your opponent relies heavily on rock slide flinches, finding ways to pressure or remove that Pokemon quickly can dramatically stabilize the game. The same applies to Serene Grace users, inaccurate attackers, or strategies that depend heavily on status effects and chance-based mechanics. A lot of competitive Pokemon is about limiting the number of dangerous outcomes your opponent has access to. If you can reduce the opportunities they have to create chaos, your games become much more controlled overall. Don't just maximize your consistently, minimize theirs too. And finally, one of the best ways to reduce RNG is during team building itself. The teams you build can either create stability or create volatility depending on how they function. Things like Wide Guard can completely shut down spread move spam and flinch fishing. Speed control helps prevent situations where you're constantly forced into damage guesses. Fake Out creates safer turns and gives you tempo. Bulky pivots allow you to reposition safely without immediately losing pressure. Row compression also becomes incredibly important here because Pokemon that can fulfill multiple functions give your team more flexibility and more stability across different matchups. And even offensively, reliable damage matters. Sometimes using a move with slightly lower power but perfect accuracy is the better long-term decision because it keeps the game under control instead of introducing unnecessary risk. At the end of the day, strong teams aren't just built to hit hard, they're built to consistently create manageable game states where luck has less opportunity to decide the outcome. One of the most important things to understand about RNG in competitive Pokemon is that players naturally remember unlucky moments far more than they remember their own bad decisions. People remember the missed attack that cost the game, they remember the rock slide flinch, they remember the critical hit and the worst possible moment. But what often gets ignored are the decisions that led to those situations in the first place. Sometimes RNG becomes less of a lesson and more of an excuse. Instead of asking what could have been done differently, players immediately blame the game itself. And while yes, sometimes you generally do get lucky, high-level players approach those situations very differently. Top players are constantly asking themselves questions like, what could I have done to make that position safer? Or did I actually need to rely on that risky play to win? That mindset is incredibly important because it shifts your focus away from frustration and toward improvement. The reality is that competitive Pokemon will never be completely fair every single game, but the players who improve the fastest are usually the ones who spend less time complaining about bad luck and more time analyzing the decisions that increased the impact RNG had on the match in the first place. And over time, that mindset leads to much more consistent results because you stop trying to control randomness itself and instead start controlling the situations where randomness matters. To tie it all together, Pokemon will always have RNG. That's just part of the game. But the best players aren't winning because they are lucky, although luck has something to do with it. They win because they consistently create turns where luck matters less and less. And in Pokémon Champions, where games are faster and optimization is stronger, the consistency matters more than ever. If you want more competitive Pokémon Champions strategy content, make sure to subscribe and let me know in the comments, what's the most frustrating RNG moment you had in Pokémon Champions so far? I'm Zem, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.